It was a crisp Friday evening in October of 1996, the kind of night that felt electric with anticipation. The small town of Maplewood had turned out in full force for the annual high school football game. Families lined the bleachers, kids ran up and down the concession lines, and the marching band's drums echoed across the field, blending with the roar of cheering fans. Among the crowd were 8 friends, all between the ages of 10 and 13, bundled up in bright red windbreakers that made them impossible to miss. They had been inseparable since elementary school, and this night was supposed to be just another fun evening of snacks, laughter, and school spirit. As the football game reached halftime, the group of kids decided to head toward the snack stands near the edge of the stadium. Parents were distracted by the halftime show, and no one noticed the kids slip away from the stands. The air was filled with the smell of hot dogs and popcorn, and the kids were laughing, unaware of the eyes that might have been watching them. In just a matter of minutes, they were gone. The crowd's attention returned to the field, the band played on, and the game continued as if nothing had happened. But for the parents of these children, the world had already shifted into panic. By the time the first parent realized their child was missing, a sense of dread rippled through the stadium. One by one, it became clear that all 8 kids had vanished. Parents screamed their names, friends frantically searched the rows of bleachers, and ushers tried to maintain order while dialing 911. Police were called, helicopters were dispatched, and the local news quickly picked up the story. Yet, despite the growing chaos and the extensive search around the stadium and parking lots, there was no trace of the kids. It was as though they had evaporated into the night. Witnesses later described the scene as surreal. Some claimed to have seen fleeting shadows near the concession stand, or glimpsed red jackets moving oddly among the crowd, but when they looked again, there was nothing. Others recalled a chill in the air, sudden and strange, as if the town itself had gone silent for a moment. The children's windbreakers, bright and unmistakable, were nowhere to be found. Investigators initially combed the stadium with metal detectors and search dogs, but the dogs stopped at certain points, barking into empty space, leaving the officers more confused than ever. By the end of that night, Maplewood had transformed from a lively, bustling town into a place of fear and disbelief. Local authorities cordoned off the stadium, setting up searchlights and patrols. News helicopters hovered overhead, capturing live footage of the frantic parents and the empty streets surrounding the stadium. For the residents, the disappearance of 8 children in broad daylight was more than a tragedy. It was a mystery that would haunt the town for decades, leaving unanswered questions that seemed impossible to solve. Once the initial panic had settled, the Maplewood Police Department launched an all-out investigation. Detectives combed every inch of the stadium, surrounding streets, and nearby woods, searching for any clue that could explain the children's disappearance. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, parents, students, vendors, and even passing strangers, but no one had seen anything that could point them in the right direction. Surveillance cameras were almost non-existent back then, and the few security tapes that existed were mysteriously blank for that night. Every lead seemed to evaporate as quickly as it appeared, leaving the investigators frustrated and the families desperate. Days turned into weeks, and the search expanded beyond the town. State police and volunteer search parties scoured nearby rivers, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas, hoping to find some trace of the missing kids. Despite the massive effort, nothing was found. No footprints, no abandoned bikes, no personal items. The only thing that seemed to vanish along with the children was any evidence that they had ever been there. For the detectives, it felt as if the kids had been swallowed by the earth itself, leaving behind nothing but empty bleachers and unanswered questions. The media quickly caught wind of the story, and national news outlets covered the strange case of the 8 vanished children. Experts were flown in to analyze the scene, and psychics even offered theories, but none could provide a concrete lead. Rumors spread like wildfire, suggesting kidnappers, cult activity, or even supernatural involvement. Some townspeople whispered that the stadium itself was cursed, while others insisted someone from inside the school had orchestrated the disappearances. With every theory, the line between fact and speculation blurred, making the case even more haunting and impossible to solve. Investigators began re-examining every small detail, hoping that something overlooked could break the case open. They noted the children's red windbreakers, the exact route they had taken toward the concession stands, and the brief eyewitness accounts of shadows moving through the crowd. Each new examination only deepened the mystery. Dogs trained to track scents went into frenzied states near certain areas of the stadium, but ultimately lost the trail as if it had been deliberately erased. Frustration turned into obsession, and detectives spent long nights reviewing witness statements, trying to make sense of the impossible. After months of exhaustive searching, the investigation began to stall. Leads dried up, suspects were cleared, and tips from the public became scarce. The once active case started to fade from headlines, and hope began to dim for the families. The police officially labeled the case cold after 5 years, though for the town of Maplewood, it never truly went away. Residents still whispered about the day the children disappeared, sharing stories of fleeting shadows, sudden chills, and unanswered questions. The haunting truth was that the mystery had become a permanent scar on the community, a puzzle that refused to be solved. Even years after the disappearances, the town of Maplewood could never shake the shadow of that October night. Every corner of the small town seemed to carry a memory of the 8 children in red windbreakers who vanished without a trace. Parents avoided the old stadium, even during harmless community events, and many families moved away quietly, unable to live with the constant reminder of what had happened. Local kids grew up hearing whispers about the missing children, stories that were half warning, half legend. Halloween nights were especially eerie, as neighbors recalled faint laughter or fleeting shadows in the areas surrounding the stadium. The anniversary of the disappearance became a somber, almost ritualistic occasion for the town. Every year, a small group of parents and friends would gather at the stadium, lighting candles and leaving flowers where the children were last seen. Each flame flickered against the autumn wind, casting long, trembling shadows over the empty bleachers. Some witnesses claimed that on these nights, they could feel a presence in the stands, as if the children themselves were watching, silently asking to be found. The town's sense of normalcy had been permanently fractured, and even decades later, the memories felt raw and immediate. Rumors circulated endlessly, fueled by the fear and uncertainty that gripped Maplewood. Some townspeople spoke of strange figures near the stadium at night, red shapes darting between the trees, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Others reported hearing whispers carried on the wind, voices calling names that hadn't been spoken in years. Teenagers who dared to explore the empty stadium told stories of cold spots, sudden chills, and the feeling of being watched. Even longtime residents who had once dismissed the tales found themselves uneasy after dark, unable to ignore the lingering presence of the vanished children. The local media occasionally revisited the story, publishing anniversary articles or interviews with the families, which only deepened the town's obsession with the mystery. Community meetings would sometimes devolve into tense discussions about what really happened, with old wounds reopened and new suspicions forming. Teachers, coaches, and other figures connected to the stadium were quietly scrutinized, as decades of unasked questions began to fester into suspicion. Maplewood had become a town living in the past, trapped by a question no one could answer. How could 8 children disappear in plain sight and leave nothing behind? Even new generations, children born years after the incident, grew up with a sense of unease surrounding the stadium and its dark history. School trips avoided the area, and parents warned their kids never to wander near the old stands after sunset. The story of the vanished children became a defining part of Maplewood's identity, shaping its culture and the fears of its residents. The mystery was no longer just a crime. It was a lingering presence, a ghost that seemed to seep into the very air of the town, ensuring that the tragedy would never truly be forgotten. 30 years had passed since that fateful night in 1996, and Maplewood had slowly tried to move on, though the memory of the missing children lingered like a stubborn shadow. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a construction crew working near the old stadium stumbled upon something that would reignite the entire case. While digging to lay new pipes near the stadium's edge, one of the workers noticed a section of the ground that looked unusually settled. Curious, he tapped at the soil and uncovered a small, rusted metal hatch hidden beneath overgrown grass and layers of decades-old dirt. At first, it seemed insignificant, but when they pried it open, what they found inside sent shockwaves through the town. Inside the hatch was a narrow, dark tunnel that stretched beneath the stadium, far longer than anyone could have imagined. It was as if the stadium itself was hiding a secret the town had never suspected. Police were immediately called, and investigators quickly cordoned off the area, descending into the dimly lit passage with flashlights and cameras. The tunnel walls were lined with old bricks, damp and covered in moss, and it clearly hadn't been disturbed in decades. The air smelled of earth and decay, but what truly sent chills down the spines of the officers were the children's belongings scattered along the ground: backpacks, shoes, and most shockingly, the bright red windbreakers they had been wearing the night they vanished. Detectives carefully documented every piece of evidence, photographing and bagging items while their minds raced to piece together the implications. How could such a tunnel exist directly beneath the stadium for 3 decades without anyone noticing? Who had built it, and for what purpose? The discovery suggested a level of planning and secrecy that made the previous investigations seem almost naive in comparison. The red windbreakers, once symbols of innocent childhood, now seemed like clues in a sinister puzzle, pointing toward an organized and deliberate act that had gone undetected for years. The town erupted in disbelief as the news spread. Parents who had long given up hope suddenly found themselves thrust back into a nightmare they thought had ended. Local authorities brought in forensic experts, engineers, and historians to analyze the tunnel and its construction, trying to understand how it could have been hidden so effectively. Every brick, every step, every crevice of the passage became a point of scrutiny. Rumors ran rampant. Had the children been held there for a time? Had someone used the tunnel to move them elsewhere? The community, already haunted by the past, now faced the terrifying possibility that the truth had been right beneath their feet all along. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives realized the tunnel was more than a hidden hiding place. It was a time capsule of decades-old secrets. The belongings, though dusty and worn, were perfectly preserved, almost as if someone had intended for them to be found one day. The red windbreakers, in particular, became a chilling symbol of the night the children disappeared, linking the past to the present with unnerving clarity. For the first time in 30 years, Maplewood had a tangible lead, but with it came new questions, deeper fears, and the unsettling realization that the children's story was far from over. Once the tunnel and the children's belongings were recovered, Maplewood's police department realized that modern forensic technology might finally shed light on the decades-old mystery. DNA testing, which had been in its infancy back in 1996, now offered tools that could reveal connections no one had imagined. Scientists meticulously collected samples from the red windbreakers, the backpacks, and even the small shoes left behind. The goal was to see if there were any traces of the children or someone who had interacted with them, a breakthrough that could finally point to their fate. The results sent shockwaves through the investigators. DNA traces matched some of the living relatives of the missing children, confirming that these belongings truly belonged to the vanished kids. But there was something else, small amounts of DNA that did not match the children, nor anyone in their immediate families. Investigators theorized that these traces might belong to the person who had taken them, possibly someone who had been intimately familiar with the stadium. The evidence suggested a chilling possibility. The abductor had been clever, careful, and close to the town, moving undetected for decades while leaving behind a trail so faint that only modern science could detect it. Authorities began digging into old personnel records, coaching staff files, and stadium maintenance logs. One name kept coming up as suspicious: a former stadium worker who had vanished shortly after the children disappeared. Retired employees recalled odd behavior, late-night trips to the stadium, secretive conversations, and a peculiar obsession with the red windbreakers themselves. Investigators realized that this man's knowledge of the stadium's hidden corners and tunnels could explain how the children were taken without anyone noticing. Every old witness interview was re-examined, revealing subtle hints that had been overlooked 30 years earlier. Forensic experts also uncovered fibers and soil traces that suggested the children had been moved through the tunnel multiple times. The red windbreakers, once bright and cheerful, now seemed like markers in a carefully orchestrated abduction plan. Experts speculated that the clothing may have been used to track or identify the children during the process. Each piece of evidence added to the story of deliberate, methodical planning. It was no longer a random disappearance. The tunnel, the windbreakers, and the DNA all painted a picture of a sinister plot that had been carefully executed and hidden in plain sight. As news of the forensic breakthroughs spread, Maplewood became a focal point for national attention once again. Families clung to hope that the evidence might finally lead to answers about what happened to their children. Meanwhile, investigators faced a new challenge. The DNA and tunnel evidence confirmed the children had been in Maplewood after disappearing, but it gave no immediate indication of their final fate. The findings hinted at a truth far more complex and horrifying than anyone had imagined, leaving the town and the nation on edge as the decades-old mystery finally began to unravel. As investigators continued to examine the hidden tunnel beneath Maplewood Stadium, they realized it was far more elaborate than anyone could have imagined. The narrow passage stretched not only under the stadium but seemed to connect to an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The walls were lined with faded graffiti and strange markings, almost like codes or messages left behind decades ago. Every corner, Every shadowed alcove seemed to whisper secrets, and detectives could feel the weight of 30 years of hidden history pressing down on them. This wasn't just a tunnel. It was a carefully constructed passage designed to conceal something truly sinister. Inside the warehouse, the police found a collection of items that sent chills down their spines. Shelves of dusty notebooks, photographs, and personal belongings had been meticulously stored, many labeled with dates and names. The red windbreakers from the night of the disappearance were there, neatly folded as if preserved for a purpose. Among the items were journals detailing schedules and movements, showing a meticulous plan to monitor and control the children over time. The sheer detail of the notes suggested that someone had studied the town and the children's routines for months, if not years, before the abduction. What shocked investigators most was the implication that the red windbreakers weren't just clothing. They were tools in a larger, disturbing system of control. The jackets appeared to have been used as markers to track the children's movements, possibly to distinguish them from others or to signal specific actions. Some pages even contained sketches of the children, with arrows pointing to the tunnel, the stadium, and the warehouse, as though someone had been mapping their every move. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. This was not a random crime, but a carefully orchestrated operation executed by someone with intimate knowledge of the town and its children. The warehouse itself held further surprises. Hidden compartments within the walls contained letters, maps, and even small recording devices, all long forgotten but still intact. It seemed the perpetrator had intended to preserve these records, perhaps as a personal archive or a chilling trophy collection. Investigators speculated that the abductor might have returned to the warehouse multiple times over the years, maintaining the items while avoiding detection. Each new discovery added layers of dread, as it became clear that the truth was far darker than the town had ever imagined. Even the architecture of the tunnel and warehouse revealed meticulous planning. The bricks were custom cut, the floors reinforced, and ventilation systems had been cleverly hidden. Whoever built this structure had not only designed a secret hiding place but a secure, controlled environment, making it almost impossible for anyone to stumble upon it until now. Police began theorizing that the children may have been kept in the area for a time before being moved, or perhaps the tunnel had been used to monitor them in a way the town would never have suspected. Every inch of the site was a reminder that this was a mystery decades in the making, with secrets so carefully buried that only a combination of luck, forensic technology, and relentless investigation had brought them to light. Even after the shocking discovery of the tunnel, the warehouse, and the red windbreakers, Maplewood was left with more questions than answers. Police had tangible evidence that the children had been in the town long after their disappearance, yet their ultimate fate remained a mystery. Investigators tried tracing the tunnel's exits and the abandoned warehouse, hoping to uncover clues about where the children might have been taken afterward. But the trail went cold once more. It seemed as if the perpetrator had been meticulous in erasing every hint of the children's final whereabouts, leaving Maplewood caught in the grip of uncertainty even 3 decades later. Families of the missing children were thrown back into a whirlwind of emotions. Hope, despair, anger, and frustration all collided as parents clung to the possibility that their children might still be alive, somewhere, hidden from the world. Psychologists and counselors were brought in to support those affected, but the emotional scars ran deep. Townspeople struggled to reconcile the horrifying reality that the children had been right under their noses, yet no one could save them. The open-ended nature of the case created an almost unbearable tension, as everyone who lived through that night wondered what had truly happened behind closed doors and hidden walls. National media outlets picked up the story again, sensationalizing the discovery of the tunnel and the red windbreakers. Experts debated what could have been the perpetrator's motive, theorizing everything from psychological obsession to a long-term kidnapping scheme. Conspiracy theories began circulating online, suggesting that the children had been trafficked or that the tunnel was part of something far larger than anyone had imagined. While the evidence suggested that the children were initially held nearby, nobody could confirm where, or if, they had ever been moved afterward. The public fascination only added to the eerie feeling that Maplewood's secrets were far from fully revealed. The authorities, while cautious, could not ignore the significance of the new evidence. Federal agencies joined the investigation, reviewing cold leads and re-interviewing witnesses who had been questioned decades ago. Technology now allowed for things that had been impossible in 1996. Satellite mapping of hidden paths, advanced DNA analysis, and digital reconstruction of the crime scene. Yet despite all this progress, the ultimate truth remained elusive. Each lead uncovered new questions, each piece of evidence hinted at more sinister activity, and each discovery reminded the town that the disappearance of the 8 children was far from a closed chapter. Meanwhile, Maplewood itself continued to live under the shadow of the mystery. The empty stadium, the abandoned warehouse, and even the quiet streets seemed haunted by the memory of those who had vanished. Every autumn, the anniversary of the disappearance rekindled grief, rumors, and speculation, as though the town collectively held its breath, waiting for answers that might never come. The red windbreakers, once symbols of innocence, had become icons of fear and the unknown, reminders that some secrets can remain buried for decades, but they never truly disappear. The children's story lingered in the town's consciousness, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are designed to endure, leaving everyone who remembers them haunted and questioning the reality of what truly happened. As the investigation continues, the fate of the 8 children who vanished that night remains unknown. 30 years have passed, yet Maplewood still remembers. The empty stadium, the abandoned warehouse, and those bright red windbreakers serve as chilling reminders that some mysteries refuse to be solved. Police have uncovered secrets, tunnels, and clues that hint at what might have happened, but the ultimate truth remains just out of reach. The town lives in the shadow of unanswered questions, and every autumn, when the chill settles over the bleachers, people still whisper their names, hoping somehow they'll return. The red windbreakers, once symbols of childhood joy, now hang in memory as echoes of a tragedy that refuses to fade. And so, the story of Maplewood's missing children remains a warning, a reminder that the past can hide in plain sight, that darkness can linger beneath familiar places, and that sometimes, even when evidence is found, the truth stays just beyond our grasp. For now, the children remain a mystery. Their story is unfinished, their fate unknown, and their memory a haunting presence that will never truly leave the town, or anyone who dares to remember that fateful night.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.